We're in the Jazz Archive at Hamilton College. I'm very pleased to have Derrick Gardner with me today. Trumpeter, educator, composer. Does that do it?
Yeah, about
Okay.
those.
I have to say that I'm envious of one of your accomplishments,
Oh boy.
and that is you've written charts and had the Count Basie Orchestra play them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
that, I mean,
Mhm,
people dream
mhm.
about that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's early in my in my arranging career, you might say. I was when I first joined the band in 1991. It was with Frank Foster was directing the band, and he would in between cities on the bus, he'd be sitting at the front of the bus in his seat with a big pad of manuscript paper for big trot out for big band instrumentation, and a black felt tip pen, and with no piano or anything, and he was doing saxophones, dee da dee da dee da, trumpets, dee da dee da, trombone, dee da dee da da, dee da dee da dee da dee da. Now looking at him doing that, I said, wow, that's pretty slick, man. I think, so I wonder if I could do that, I've got some ideas about arranging, about a tune I want to arrange, And so I bought me a big pad of score paper, the manuscript paper, and got my pencil. I didn't get the pen, I said, dee da dee da dee dee da dee da. And I wrote about 8 to 10 measures or something, And I figured, I said, man, I've got one of the greatest arrangers in the history of this music at arm's length distance to me. I've got to, learn something from him. So after I wrote out my few little measures, I went to the front of the bus about a couple weeks later, and I said, "Hey, Foss, man, would you kindly take a look at this and see if I'm on the right path here, And he said, "Okay." So he took it and looked at it, and he was looking at it, And while he's like kind of going, he took his cap from the black pen, put it, grabbed his red pen, took the cap off, and said, "Okay, that's all wrong, and this should be natural instead of B flat. Why don't you put a G sharp there? That should be G sharp. Make that a G natural. This, you caught the flat 5 here, but why you got flat 5 here? But you got it said sharp 5. No, don't do that. That's gonna clash with the chord." And just kind of did the Zorro thing all over my things. That, okay, well, check that out. And I looked at it, and he basically just bled all over my page. I said, "Okay." So I went back to the back of the bus where my seat was, and tail between my legs. I said, "Whew." So we got to the hotel. Fortunately, the hotel had a piano, and I played through all the corrections that he made. I said, "Okay, I see. Oh wow, boy, I was sure was off in my thinking here. Wow." And so the next thing I did was I bought me a little keyboard, and about a month later, I wrote out about 10 or 12 measures or something, and we're on the bus, and I went to Foss. "Hey, Foss, you take a look at this?" And he said, "Okay." So put the black cap with the red pen, and he said, "Oh, it's okay." So these formats here, that's wrong. Shouldn't like that. We do it like this. And each time, so he gave it back to me and said, "Okay." So and each time I went back to him, I had less blood on my page, and so I just went off of his instruction, and started learning some of the voicings that he uses, and applied them to what I do, and because of that, wow, it was like a graduate, a doctorate course in big band arranging, and totally, totally. I mean, it's invaluable the information that he gave me.
And this is pre-finale or Sibelius or anything?
This was just about around the time when finale was starting to raise his head, I guess. Matter of fact, it was finale came a few years later. There was a program called Music Printer Plus that I think that might have been the first one.
Okay, but did you eventually you wrote something and then the band played it?
Oh no, I didn't. That didn't happen for maybe another 2 years.
Okay.
From the first time I went to the front of the bus and showed False my arrangement, and that was like passing out an arrangement to the Basie band was like going before the Supreme Court. It was, man, well, man, I don't know if this is gonna work, man. You might this isn't Basie. It's not. No, it's a little too. No, it's not gonna work. It's a toss it.
Pasadena.
Worked on this thing for like 3 years, but what? Man, boy, but they were, the Basie band. That's how they kept their sound. They were very, very strict as far as not letting just anything, be played by them. And so I learned the Basie sound, the equation for what is a Count Basie arrangement, because Count Basie didn't arrange, wasn't an arranger. He was hardly a composer. He only composed a handful of
right.
tunes, that were made into arrangements. His arrangers were Frank Foster and Thad Jones and Jimmy Mundy, Nestico,
yeah.
and I'm leaving out some Neil Hefti. And all these, and then a few others, Quincy Jones.
Yeah.
Ernie Wilkins, yeah. Oh man, Ernie Wilkins. So those were the people who formulated the basic sound, and when they brought in the arrangement to the band, it was even worse then, because that's when Basie was alive. It was in his heyday, and that's when Basie would kind of carve up the arrangement and say, that section right there, on the bridge there, horns y'all lay out. I'm gonna take that. Whole big old, it could be like this thick orchestrated thing, all this counterpoint, all this stuff happens, and basically, cut all that out. I'm gonna take that. What?
Oh man! Can you just picture after all that?
Oh yeah.
I mean, here you are, like, Basie's band playing my stuff.
Yeah.
And there's like, but.
Yeah, cut it out. I'm gonna take that part. And after he would do his surgical thing on the arrangement, then he's like, okay, now that's Basie, and the arrangement will be what it is, Yeah.
That's great. Well, you grew up in Chicago.
Yeah.
Was there a definite point in your life that you said, music, that's it for me. That's going to be my career?
Yeah. Matter of fact, it's funny. I just answered that question earlier today in Doc's history class, and it was around the time when I was about maybe a junior in high school that I said, I think music is the direction I'm going to go. Both my parents are musicians and educators as well. My father's a jazz trumpeter, and he was in the Ray Charles band back in the early '60s with Hank Crawford and Marcus Belgrave and all those guys, Fathead Newman and stuff. And my mother's a classical pianist and organist and choir director. And so growing up in Chicago, I got it from both ends. My mother would be practicing classical music upstairs, and then down in the basement where my father's practice room was, he'd be swinging, playing cannonball and stuff, And I was taking piano lessons at 5 years old. My mother had me take piano lessons, and and practicing these sort of very simple, beginning piano etudes or whatever, and I eventually got bored with it, after 3 or 4 years of doing that, and finally decided upon, I thought, hearing my father's music, I said, I want to play that, So you want to play what, jazz? Oh yeah, I want to do that. I didn't know that the piano could do that,
Oh.
and so my elementary school was starting a band program. I was 9 years old, and it said, okay, who wants to join the band? I said, oh, I want to join the band. And said, what do you want to play? I want to play the trumpet. And I said, well, we don't have a trumpet. What about this clarinet over here? No, a trumpet. Well, we don't have a trumpet. I said, okay, I'll take care of this. So I ran home and so, Daddy, I want to play trumpet. Really? I said, yeah. So he had a trumpet for me, and okay, take this. And so next day with a trumpet, and that was kind of the rest was kind of history, I guess,
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, was there some people talk about their a big break, or somebody took extra time with you, and that caused a good shift for you. Was there a moment like that for you?
That would have to be, it would have to be the time when I joined the Basie band. As fate would have it, my mother got me the gig. You can imagine that. My mother at the time was chairperson of the music department at Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia. And I was in grad school at Indiana University with Mike Woods. And my mother called, and what happened was that the Basie band was looking for a school to archive all of Basie's stuff, music, other items, whatever. They were looking for a school. They chose Hampton, and with that, they wanted to set up an annual jazz festival and a series of master classes and clinics for an entire week there at the school. And when they were doing the meetings for that, to discuss all the specifics, they had a trumpet chair open, and they asked my trumpet teacher that was there at the time. His name was Bob Ransom, fabulous trumpeter, and said, well, hey, Bob, we got a chair open. You want to come up with the band? He said, oh man, I'm too old for that. I'm going out on the road, man. Dr. Gardner, Dr. Gardner's son. He's ready. He's ready to go out. And my mother was like, I'll call him right now. So after the meeting, she called me and said, look, you're going to get a call from the Count Basie Orchestra, and they're going to call you to go out on the road. I said, Mom, what have you been smoking? I said, what? How would you even have connections within those circles? So she explained the whole thing. I said, wow, really? Okay. So the next day I got a call from Aaron Woodward, who was Count Basie's adopted son, and he was in control of the orchestra as far as its bookings, and he owned the band basically, and he was in those meetings that was happening in Hampton. And so he called me and talked to me and kind of interviewed me on the phone, I guess, and then later that night I got a call from Frank Foster, and I phone was like this in my hand, said, oh, Mr. Foster, and so we had a chance to talk, and I sent him. He told me to send him a tape of my playing and everything, and back then we were using tapes.
Yes.
Cassette tapes,
Cassettes.
So I sent him a cassette tape of my playing, and he heard it and got back to me and said, boy, you're a great player, man. Well, come on, we're ready for you. And I left in, that was January of '91 when I left. And our first gig was in Newark, New Jersey, at some function there, and I didn't know that I thought I had the gig, basically. I didn't know that the first gig was the audition. So I had left school and everything and pulled up roots and and met them in New Jersey, did the gig, and then after the gig was over, he said, "All right, kid, well, you played pretty good. I guess you can have the gig." I said, I thought I already had it, but that was an audition, man. We didn't have this gig. Oh, goodness. If I knew that, man, I know.
I can see you calling the registrar.
Oh, yeah, right.
That's a good story.
Oh, man.
And were you basically sight reading, or you knew some of the music?
Well, yeah, I knew some of the music, but the Basie band has their own way of playing what is written on the page, and which makes the band sound, particularly unique. And for instance, there's this piece in there called, or Ernie Wilkins' piece called "Right On, Right On," and the figure is quarter rest followed by, what would do 1, 2, 3, 4 eighth notes, eighth rest, and followed by a eighth note tied over, and so I saw it. And I said, okay, it's a 1 do 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 da, boo do do da. So we got to it, and this is the big shout section, right? And so they get to it, and the whole band goes 1 do de da, do de da, and I'm going do de da, do that like.
You guys got the same music that I do.
Well, look at the music. Do de da. So I'm trying to hear this now. Do de. So, all right, okay, wow. And so, but you can see everybody's kind of looking at me because they know coming up to that there's no pre-instruction that's going to happen. So I'm going do de da, and out of the corner of everybody's eye, they're like that, Well, thanks guys for telling me this,
Yeah.
And then and the hardest piece in the book, I always say this, was "Little Darling," and because of the breath control, needed to play that. "Little Darling" and Thad Jones' piece called "To You." Both are very similar ballads, So with "Little Darling," they have this this phrasing and breathing thing in part of the melody, where again it's written one way and it's played another way. It goes, the tune is be da do like that, and so it goes on to bo dee da da bo wee bo do bo da da do. But old green thumb me, I'm like bo dee do bo do da da. Everybody's looking at it. I get to look at it, I said, oh. And I'm looking at the page, I said, that's a natural breath to take right there. Why isn't there? Oh, okay, this is the way that they do it, Totally blew my mind that, first that you could do that. And also that everybody in that band breathed and phrased like one person. I mean, everybody. And if a new person comes into the band, you can tell it that he or she is gonna be out of place because the phrasing is so exact and so unique.
Wow.
So yeah, that would be kind of definitely a revelation in my musical life.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, as I said, I'm jealous. Well, gonna have to jump ahead a few years. What's it like? You have this group called the Jazz Prophets.
Yeah.
what's it like these days to try to keep a corps of musicians together to carry out a project like that? And everybody's, by necessity, probably doing multiple things,
Yeah.
including yourself.
Yeah.
Is it hard?
Oh, it's extremely difficult. You know, without the financial backing of a record label, which there are ways around that as well, or the support of a publicity team, you know, or a booking agent, manager, those type of supporting figures, IT person for your website, you know, all those things. And it took me a long time to figure out that that's what was needed, you know. And I finally kind of have a few of those pieces in place, you know. It's still very difficult to find work for the ensemble, or the type of work that I would like to have, that pays for everything. You know, that pays for the travel, lodging, and all the other little specifics. You know, and the musician fees as well. And so those are the jobs that I'm holding out for. I could work quite a bit more, but the money wouldn't be right, and the travel situation wouldn't be right, the hotels wouldn't be right. I would have to come out of my pocket to, you know, cover some of those expenses. So I end up just losing a lot of money. And I've seen it work for many other artists, you know, who carry their own bands, and so that's what I'm trying to do the same thing on my own. And I'm pretty close to kind of figuring it out. In the meantime, I just have to work in this kind of sporadic schedule when maybe these 2 or 3 gigs that we do per year come through, you know, everything is in place and everything is right, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
I saw a quote from your website that had to do with introducing new music to the jazz genre. Do you feel that's part of your goal, mission?
Oh, without a doubt, you know. You can only play all the things you are but so many times, you know. And along with all the other great standards that have been put out there. And there are even a lot of tunes by pre-existing tunes that haven't been played a lot. You know, people like tunes like Miles Davis, not Miles Davis, but Wayne Shorter, who wrote ESP, from you know, on that Miles Davis record, or other Wayne Shorter's got like El Gaucho, or by Herbie Hancock or Gigi Grice or anybody, you know. But nonetheless, you know, we have something to say as within the Jazz Prophets as composers, and I use that sextet in order to provide a vehicle for that. And we have 3 CDs out, and actually one more that's in the can of new music, you know. And so in order for the music to continually progress, I believe that you have to keep adding to the genre in order to just keep it fresh. You know, the jazz, the kind of the musical concept of my group is heavily steeped in the hard bop tradition. You know, because of our instrumentation, it's very easy for us to kind of come out of the Art Blake and the Jazz Messengers kind of format. You know, although we don't do any of that music, because of the texture of because of the instrumentation, the texture kind of sounds the same with the trumpet, trombone, and tenor saxophone. But we change that texture up quite a bit. Sometimes sometimes I have the tenor saxophonist Rob Dixon. I have him playing either alto or soprano saxophone and even on sometimes having my brother Vincent play euphonium,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and me playing the trumpet or flugelhorn,
Yeah.
to changing the texture up, and we're writing in a different vein that was done during the hard bop era. So it's in keeping with this new era, I guess, that some historians have called neo-traditional or neo-classic jazz or whatever, you know. There's a lot of new music out here, you know, and it's good music. You know, we wouldn't play it unless it was good, you know. So yeah, there's just a lot of stuff out
I
here.
want to see if I can see if this will work for me.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you about something here. So you've heard this before.
I think I kind of heard it a little bit, you know.
Where does the idea come from for a song like that?
It can come from anywhere. It can come from any and all directions. Sometimes you hear the melody first. Sometimes you hear a chord progression first. Sometimes you hear a rhythmic
Okay.
beat that might influence it. And I've written pieces from all directions. You know, that particular piece came from a voicing that Frank Foster showed me on the piano for a big band or saxophone section voicing that's very spread out. Matter of fact, fifths between the baritone and the second tenor, and then fifths between the first tenor, second alto, and lead alto. You know, and then you fit the trombones in between the spaces there. You know, it's a real big, thick sounding chord. And so he was showing me this voicing for the saxophones, and I was checking it out, and I said, man, that's nice. And then I kind of started moving things around here, and I said, wait a minute, what's this? And I said, oh, wait, I like this, you know. So I wrote a tune based off of that voicing, and then added a melody to it, you know. And there were there's another tune that I wrote from a particular rhythmic beat or feel that a wonderful friend of mine that I used to teach with at Michigan State University, his name was Randy Gillespie, one of the unsung legends on drums. I mean, this guy sounds like Roy Haynes or Art Blakey or any of them, or Elvin Jones. He used to be the drummer with Sonny Stitt and Wes Montgomery, you know, back in the day, and he was teaching drums at Michigan State. And we were on this gig one time, and he started playing this particular beat that was just as significant as, like, say, you know, the beat on Ahmad Jamal's Poinciana. You know, something is you know, it's something is as significant, it's different, but it was as significant as that, you know. And he broke it out on this we were trading, and I did my 4 bars trading, and then he broke out this beat, you know. And I turned around, I said, man, what is that? He just smiled at me, you know. I said, yeah, I got you, yeah. So after the gig, I said, man, do that thing you were doing, man. We were trading for it. And so he explained to me that when he was playing with organist, I can't think of the organist's name. He had they were playing in Atlantic City, and they were opening for Jimmy Smith. and Gene Ludwig. He was playing with Gene Ludwig, and they were opening for Jimmy Smith, and they were playing cover. They were covering a Ray Charles tune or something, and he said he broke out this beat. And he said, and all of a sudden the crowd just got up, started dancing and everything, getting all hyped and everything. And then he played that thing for an hour. I said, wow, man, you know. And then Jimmy Smith came to him after he finished. Jimmy Smith came up to him and said, man, I don't know why they got us coming on. Y'all done burnt up the stage, man. We can't play after that. You know?
Nice.
But I wrote an entire tune based off of that beat that he played, called it Soulful Brother Gillespie. And I even wrote it, expanded into a big band arrangement, you know. So that's to say that I've composed off of many influences, you know, and you know from something like that, or just might hear the melody first. And I wrote a tune called on my first CD, the title track was called Slim Goody, and I heard that melody while I was on the subway. While I was living in New York, I was traveling on the subway to visit my girlfriend at the time, and it was before cell phones, and so I heard this melody in my head, and I said, "Man, I really like this melody," you know, but I was right in the middle of my journey uptown, you know. And I said, man, I can't forget this melody. And so I just started singing it to myself, you know, and people started looking at me on the subway, you know. It doesn't really strike anybody strange on the New York subway, you know. And so when I got to my subway stop, I got up and went to a payphone and called my answering machine and just sang it into the answering machine so I wouldn't forget it, you know. Because, you know, man, you'll think of something like at night when you go to sleep and your mind is open.
Yeah.
And, I really like that melody, man, okay. When I get up tomorrow, I'm going to write it down. And you get up the next morning and say, what was the thing I thought about last night? And it's gone. You know, you can't even think about it, man, you know.
Well, it kind of brings me to a question. I'm not sure how to ask it, but does music for you, or especially in your own compositions, does it have to mean something? Does it have to have a subtext, or can it just be music?
I think that that there is music that can be written for that can be functional, you know, that serves a purpose. Like I was just talking to Doc Woods about this earlier today. He was talking about, you know, writing for films, and the music has to convey a mood and not take away from the dialogue that's being conveyed in the film, you know. And so I think that, or background music at a restaurant, you know, it serves a purpose. But when you're composing music to be really listened to, concertized music, you know, or when you're improvising. I'm one that believes that you have to move people, you know, and you have to give your listeners something that's going to keep that person engaged the entire time, or dialed in, you know. And in that respect, I do believe that music has to mean something, you know, and you can't. There are certain techniques that you can use that can you can say, okay, well, I'm just going to write a what's called a contrafact over all the things you are. You know, you erase the melody, chord changes are still there, and you just write a new melody. Okay, simple enough, you know. Even when you're doing that, you know, that melody has to mean something. You know, like Kenny Dorham did that with All Things Joy. He wrote well, now I can't think of the name of the tune. I can't think of it. I'm sure whoever listens to this will probably know it. but but when I listen to that, that's not that's not music that I would listen to as like background music or elevator music or something. Man, that music is engaging, you know, and so that's what I try to do every time I perform. I try to engage my listener, and every time I write, I try to engage my listener in the same way that I improvise. I try to convey that on the score paper when I'm writing, you know. And there are certain ways that you do that, manipulating the voicings and the texture of the instruments and everything, you know. But I always try to move people. Yeah.
I had to chuckle because I read a quote of yours, and it was almost exactly a quote that I got from Ed Shaughnessy years ago, and it was about, if you look out there and some people, at least some of the people, aren't moving or tapping your feet, you're not doing
doing your job. That's right. Yeah. Yep. Your Basie said the same thing. That's right. That's right.
Wow. Here's a hard question. And I thought of it because I just attended a research presentation by a student here, and she wrote a paper. She was doing research on basically on women in jazz, and partially race, but she was mostly focusing on gender. But in your opinion, in today's scene, does it make a difference if a young musician trying to get into the business is African American or Caucasian or Asian? Does it make a difference these days?
No, no, I don't think it makes a difference. You're speaking specifically to jazz.
Yes.
No, I believe that everybody, no matter where they come from, has something to contribute, and jazz has been given to the world as America's contribution to the world of music, you know, and African Americans are the people that gave this music, that offered this music through the borders of America to the world, you know. And so now it's become an international music, you know, and Asians are exposed to it, Europeans are exposed to it, Australians are exposed to it, you know, Africans are exposed to it. It being the big difference between being African and African American. Two different cultures. There are many transcendental things that are similar between our two cultures, but still it's two different cultures. And so when jazz is being exposed to Africans, those inherent African things that are similar can come out, but there's still some differences, like the the ride cymbal beat. Bang a dang, bang a dang, dang a dang, dang a dang, dang a dang, dang a dang, dang, is right in tune with the 6/8 feel that you hear in African music all the time. Let it slow down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, step over, tip over, dang, 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 dang. You go shuffle, dang, 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 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, step over, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, Now you break it down like that, then this is African, you know, that upbeat, and those are the things that are similar. Now, and even the bending of those pitches, that wasn't done in European music. That wasn't done in American music until it came up from the music that was brought about during the times of slavery, and how those field hollers and work songs, how those bent pitches started to work themselves into the fabric of American music, and so it's a lot of different things that I think I kind of went off on a tangent here, but there are many different because jazz is now American music. Jazz is now international music. Those people who are being exposed to it are now able to contribute to it, and no, you don't have to be a non-African American in order to contribute to it. I don't believe that at all.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's a good answer. And I see you're fairly, you had mentioned before having an IT person. And I can see it looks to me like you're fairly techno hip. You have lessons, you're offering lessons by Skype.
Yeah.
It's like almost a necessity now,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I also mentioned this earlier in this interview about the fact that there are ways around not having to use a record company in order to get your music out there. That ties in with that, The internet has become an incredible resource for musicians. And we have to, we have to learn how to manipulate the internet in order to make our small business a successful one. Because as a musician, you essentially are starting your own small business, and you are the product. So you have to use the internet in a way of marketing, publicity. And you have to use the internet as far as getting your music out there, and in the way of distribution. Prior to the internet, the only way you get your music out there was to go through a distribution company. Most times those distribution companies only associated themselves with record labels. If you came to a distribution company as an individual, they wouldn't even look at you because you wouldn't have a catalog of product to offer them.
Yeah.
So then you look to the record companies to try and get signed with them, so you can become part of their catalog. Well, they have their own set list of criteria, in order for you to get signed to the, and so those of us who haven't been signed onto a record label, you have to kind of fend for yourself, and then the internet comes along, and say, oh, wait a minute, now I can produce my own product, pay for the musician's fees to get a nice product, packaged and ready to go for physical distribution. But I can take that CD and also digitally upload it to my website, and also to other sites like CD Baby, or other companies like CD Baby as well. Also divert traffic through Reverb Nation and Facebook, and have all these other sites act as like a kind of to divert the traffic to your website so that they can find out everything about you, the artist, and get them interested in your music. So and there's some artists that have been very successful at doing that. Prince, the R&B and the soul artist, he was probably one of the first ones to really manipulate the internet early in its infancy. He had a big, huge record deal with Warner Brothers, and after all the success he had with like Purple Rain and
Little Red Corvette.
Little Red Corvette, all that stuff, he said, I don't have to be controlled by this big conglomerate of Warner Brothers. I can do this myself, And so he started his own record label, and got a person to manipulate the internet for him, and with his name being pretty much household, he was able to draw people to his website and sell music directly through his own website, and the music goes directly to him. The money goes directly to him. So it is possible. We have to figure out how to do this.
Yeah, and even some of the middle-aged jazz artists, I guess I would say, who have record labels, most of them are not happy with their record labels either.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. There are other. I was just talking with a friend of mine earlier today about this trumpeter named his name was Ferez Whitted, and he recently took his project to a company called Origin Records, where you can I think you pay them a fee of about $4,000 or $5,000, and they'll package your product, like doing the artwork and the packaging. They will do the publicity and the radio promo for a good maybe 4 to 6 week run, maybe an 8 week run of promo, and they'll have international distribution, all for $4 or $5 grand, and those are the you pay more than that. A record company, I think, will, if they don't have all that in house in their own record company, they'll pay more than that amount, in order for those services. So that's a pretty good deal.
Mm-hmm.
So there are ways of doing this without going to the traditional route of, sending in your CD to a record label with the promo kit and everything. Would you please sign me?
Right.
So we have to.
Likely these days.
Yeah.
Well, and a part and parcel with sort of the older generation talking about individuality, a lot of them would also say that nowadays everybody sounds the same because they're all using the same books, etc. And do you agree with that? And if so, what do you do?
I totally agree with that.
As a teacher, what?
Well, you have to sound like someone in order to sound like yourself. In the beginning of I guess in the formative years of your being able to play at an advanced skill level of improvisation, you're going to sound like somebody else. Like Dizzy Gillespie sounded like Roy Eldridge in those early years. Miles Davis sounded like Dizzy in his early years. And Lee Morgan sounded like Clifford Brown in his early years, So, but they eventually got tired of playing that way and started going into their own direction. I don't think that's happening so much now. I hear a lot of the not just trumpet, but even on other instruments. I hear a lot of the younger generation like staying in the nest for which they were born. A lot of trumpeters are infatuated with Freddie Hubbard, as am I. I'll be the first to say that I'll have some Freddieisms that will come out of my playing, but I like to think that I have matriculated into something else, and I gauge that by people who say to me that, man, I I heard this trumpeter man on the radio the other day. Somebody's playing, man, and I said, man, that sound like Gardner, man. That sound like Derrick, you know. And sure enough, when the guy announced the tune, it was you. It was you, man. You know. I said, wow. Okay, well, that means that we're starting to come into my own sound, you know. And he didn't say like, yeah, man, you sound just like Freddie Hubbard. You sound just like Clifford Brown, you know. Which thank you for even associating me with those cats, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, you have to graduate into your own thing, and I think that that's what players nowadays have to start pushing for. You can't just sound like you can't sound like Cannonball forever. You can't sound like Freddie Hubbard forever. You know, you can't sound like Paul Chambers or Ron Carter forever. You know, you got to use that as a launching pad into what you're trying to get into. You know, into your own voice.
Well said. I'm just going to take a crack and run a few names by you. Joe Wilder.
Oh, wow. Probably one of the most consummate trumpet players to ever live. He and one of the most versatile trumpeters as well. Not only in jazz but also in classical music, and versatile to the point where he's able to he could accept a gig and within the classical circles. He was one of the first trumpeters to I want to say that one of the first black trumpeters to play this in this arena, but he was one of the first black trumpeters to choose to play on Broadway. And back during the time when there was plenty of work to go around in other jazz circles, you know, he was playing Broadway gigs, you know, in the pit orchestras, and such a fabulous style of playing as well. You know, he's able to. He plays, and I'm very careful with trumpeters or musicians of his generation, because you think that they play in just like the older style of improvisation, like playing in like more of the swing style, you know, of improvisation of jazz. But if you had him play on something like Footprints or ESP or something like that, you know, he will throw something out at you that he played 30, 40 years ago that fits, and you'll just be like, whoa, where did that come from? You know, this happened to me with it happened with I learned this from my father. My father's another trumpeter that I respect hugely, and I always say that I put my trumpet in the case when he plays, you know, and I get out the pad and pencil and take notes, you know. I discovered Clifford Brown through him. His man is Clifford Brown. But there was I was playing a Broadway show that went to Europe. It's called Black and Blue, and we were in Germany, and we were in Hamburg, I believe. And the Monday nights is the dark night for a Broadway show. There's no show on Monday night, so we found a place in town where we could play on Monday nights, and the place called Dennis Swing Club, I think. I think it's since closed now, but we were playing there every Monday night, and the cat that was playing second trumpet to me, his name was Irv Stokes.
Irv Stokes.
Irv Stokes.
Yes,
yeah, I'm sure you might recognize that name. He played a lot with Lou Donaldson.
Mm-hmm.
And fabulous trumpet player of that older generation. And I'd always played a lot of swing gigs with him, you know, and he was just nailing it to the wall. So we got to the jam session on Monday nights, we were getting all modern, playing Footprints, Giant Steps, and all this stuff, and playing all these tunes, up tempo stuff like Just in Time, and what's another tune, like Proven Ground tunes. We were doing all that. We were hitting Cherokee and everything, you know.
Yeah.
And he comes in and he gets up and plays, and he just falls right in. And then we play something like I think we played Footprints. And he played and he just switched like a light bulb, boom, and started playing this other way, and everything he played just fit right into the chord changes, right into the vibe of the tune, and we were all like, "Whoa, where did this side of Irv come from? We didn't know he even played like this, you know." Mm-hmm. And I said, and I had the whole time he was playing, I had my notepad. I was like, Oh really? Oh wow, man! It was. So I've learned.
Yeah.
That okay, Sonny boy. In class today, we're going to learn this. Yeah.
How about Joe Williams? I saw
Joe Williams. Oh man. It was such a. I felt like I was in school the entire time when we got the chance to perform with Joe Williams when I was with the Basie band. I did several tours with him, and wow, his sense of phrasing and timing and the way that he just treats a tune was impeccable. Every note and every lyric that he sang was perfectly placed, almost like he was reading from a page, you know. And he was able to take the audience and just put the audience right in his hand, and the whole audience is just like that, you know, just waiting. And just you know, he had total command of the audience. There was one tune that Shirley Horn made famous, called "Here's to Life." Man, and Joe Williams did it. Oh my God! And Joe just tore it up, man. This really just did such a beautiful job with it, and the audience was just, you could hear a pin drop, you know, and so I definitely learned to take my time with by listening to him. You know, I was able to learn the meaning of the tune through him. You know, because the way that he sang was like he was telling you a story. You know, and so, oh, that's what that tune's about. You know, and a lot of times instrumentalists just get into the notes. Just when you learn the tune, just learn the notes. You don't learn the lyrics of the tune to find out what the tune is about, you know. And so, upon hearing Joe sing these tunes, I'm learning what the tune is about. And not in the manner that he's singing it to me, but more like he's telling a story. But then we haven't even talked about the blues yet. That's a whole nother thing. I mean, wow. Well, this was just a whole graduate mini course on how to sing the blues. You know, if you need any help with doing that, go to Joe Williams. You know.
You know, I got to get you to your thing.
Okay. Yeah.
But this has really been fascinating, and one of the best kinds of compliments a person gets is something that wasn't drawn out. One of my saxophone students, Brett, played with you on the jam session last night, and he said, "I really like that guy. He didn't play a zillion notes like some of the other people, and every note seemed to mean something." Mm-hmm. He said that about you.
Wow.
I think that's a high compliment.
Wow.
Because he's a person who listens to a lot of music in addition to playing it. So.
Sure. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. I have to send him his check.
Well, it's really been nice talking to you. I look forward to
much.
hearing you tonight with the band. And,
sure thing. Thank you. It's a wonderful interview, and Glad to be a part of it.
All right,
Yeah, yeah.
thanks a lot.
I do.